All right, so it is 1:30 on the nose, so let's go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining our session this afternoon, Archives Without Borders. Next slide, please. During the next 30 minutes, we will be introducing ourselves and providing a brief overview of how our library and our archives and special collections unit, what they look like. We'll provide an overview of digital collections at our library, including local and commercial collections, and how we collect these materials. We'll cover how users currently discover digital archival material and some of the options and challenges that we're finding to improve the discovery of these materials. And then lastly, we hope to have time for some questions and to hear any work that your institution is doing in this area. So I'm going to turn it over to Jan to take it from here.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm really pleased to be here with my colleagues, Hannah McKelvey and Rochelle McLean, because without collaboration, this presentation wouldn't be possible, just as unifying our collections for our students and researchers isn't possible without working across the internal borders of our organizations. So we're going to start by telling us who we are, not who you are, but who we are and why we're working together. Next slide. And maybe Rochelle, you'd start.
Sure. I'm Rochelle McLean. I'm the collection development librarian here at MSU in Bozeman. I do have the pleasure of working with both Jan and Hannah. However, I work very closely with Hannah in the same department, which we call Collections, Access, and Technical Services. Among other duties, I manage the library's collections budget and also make decisions on the acquisitions we make. And one of those acquisition decisions, although too rare that I get to make, is purchasing commercial digital archives.
I am Hannah McKelvey. I'm our Electronic Resources and Discovery Services librarian. As Rochelle noted, I work alongside her in the Collections Access and Technical Services Department. That's a mouthful, so we usually just call it CATS internally. My primary job duties are managing access to electronic resources and negotiating those licenses and contracts. And then I also oversee our discovery layer, which is Primo by Ex Libris.
And I'm Jan Zuha, Humanities and Outreach Librarian, and I'm located in Archives and Special Collections at the MSU Library. I have a long history of working in public services, teaching, and helping users to find the content they need and then to understand what they're finding. I'm a lot less conversant in technical issues, such as the guts of the LMS or anything like that. And my relationship to our collections is really one of just being able to get excited about them and grateful and help users use them. And I don't have to figure out how to organize or describe them. Next slide. We want to also give you just a little bit of information about our library. We're a medium-sized land-grant university, and we're, of course, understaffed in the way that all libraries are right now. We also participate in a consortium which we created and which we lead, called TRAILS, which stands for the Treasure State Academic Information and Library Services Consortium. And this enables us to share resources across all types of academic libraries in the state, including large academic libraries like MSU, the state's community colleges, and our many tribal colleges. Next slide. And then just to give you a little bit about our archives and special collections, like most academic libraries, we have this special enclosed area on the second floor of our library, and it contains more than 34,000 volumes and 12,000 linear feet of manuscript materials. We curate rare and unique collections in all formats that represent the cultural and scientific heritage of Montana and the region, as you can see from our list of collection areas here. We integrate our collections into the MSU curriculum through teaching and into the community through outreach. Because we're a land grant, it's very important for us to bring our materials out to the citizens of Montana and beyond. I like to think of us as a laboratory of primary documents. So that's us. Next slide, please. Like most archives and special collections, we increasingly have digital collections, both things that are both born digital and that we digitize locally, that we seek to make accessible and interesting to students and beyond, just as we do our physical archives. Next slide, please. Though many of our researchers and donors would like to see everything in digital format, we have limitations in terms of time and funding, of course. Our decisions to digitize partial or entire collections are based on funding, collection priorities, including things like preservation and user needs and requests. So at this point, our digital collections number just under 1 million digital objects locally created. Our largest digitized collection is the student newspaper going back to 1894 with over 73,000 items. Other large collections that are entirely or partially digitized include the author Ivan Doig's literary archives, collections from Yellowstone National Park, fly fishing history, including a lot of oral histories, Native Americans through white eyes, either in writing or in photographs, images, lots of agricultural stuff, Montana history, and extension service records. And our hurdle to understanding whether we are digitizing the right things and successfully marketing them or pushing them out there is that at present, we are not tracking the usage of our local digital objects in the same way that we track our use of our amazing commercial databases of primary sources. So that's a limitation that we have. But now I'll turn it over to Rochelle to talk more about those wonderful commercial digital archives that we subscribe to our own. Next slide.
Thank you, Jan. So starting back in 2011, the library has been able to purchase commercial digital archives from a few different vendors. Our current holdings include 11 digital archives with Adam Matthew Digital. We have over 40 primary source and Archives Unbound collections with Gale. And then just this year, we were able to purchase the Early English Books online collection from ProQuest. All of these were one-time purchases, so it ensures that our users will have perpetual access to these collections. So we found that interest in a commercial digital archive almost always comes from either a non-library faculty request or from a library faculty request, usually Jan. We have made an exception to this a couple times. Once we did purchase a digital archive from a vendor after learning about it from that vendor, and because it's so closely aligned with our collection development areas, we went ahead and purchased it. But usually if a vendor lets us know about an archive, we'll pass that information along to the rest of the librarians who are encouraged to let us know here in acquisitions if they want to pursue a trial. Without question or exception, we always will do a trial. We prefer to have one that runs at minimum semester long, and so that will be our request to the vendor. Our preference is to make an archive purchase a one-time outright purchase. There was one case where we did agree to a one-year subscription, and then at the end of that 1 year, we did choose to buy it, and we were able to apply those one-year subscription funds to that purchase. I think that's the ideal scenario, is to be able to try it before we buy it, and then get access to it for long enough that we can monitor whether it's getting any use. Hannah and I found ourselves in situations where we begrudgingly agree to a 1 week or even a 1 month trial at the request of the vendor. And usually the person at the university who requested that trial did not have the opportunity to even try it out. So that's just not long enough. If we do end up making that outright purchase, it's also our preference to avoid having to pay any continuing service fee or hosting fees. So we don't like to have a subscription fee on top of that one-time purchase. And so we'll try to either ask for it to be waived, or we'll bundle it into that one cost, so that we're not constantly paying that subscription fee year after year. We will also avoid a significant hosting fee if we have to. So if it's anything above $1,000, that will possibly dissuade us from purchasing that archive. Vendors also usually will work with us to split payments over fiscal years, which can be really helpful because some of these archives are pretty spendy. So if you can only have a chunk of money to spend one year and then save money your next fiscal year, that can help you attain those archives. We do look at usage after purchase, but not in the same way that we would look at subscription usage, and not as closely. We'll mostly look at it to get an idea if a platform is popular or not, or if a certain subject gets higher use and versus low use. We think that data can definitely inform a future purchase decision, either from the same platform or a different, same topic area, but a different vendor. And then as far as outreach goes, here in acquisitions, I think for my part, being responsive to a request is my priority. So we want to ensure that we get a trial set up in a timely manner at, as soon as possible after a request, if possible. And then after a trial is up and running or after a purchase is made, we do tend to then rely on that person who requested the resource to do outreach. So that is the librarian or the faculty member who's working with the department that's going to use the archive. But we don't just leave our coworkers hanging. We are happy to get them in touch with vendors who often will offer to do web trainings, or at least in the past, they would even offer to come to campus and do trainings. And we also are happy to get them connected with promotional literature that can help promote the resource. And then lastly, Jan talked a little bit about Trails, our consortium. Recently, back in 2019, as part of that consortium, MSU was delighted to be able to split the cost of purchasing Gale's 19th century collections online. And so University of Montana and MSU were the two larger academic libraries in Montana. We split that cost. We will retain perpetual rights to the resource, but our remaining 23 academic, community college, and tribal colleges will have complimentary access to that archive as part of that purchase. I'll pass it on to Hannah. Thank you.
So we have all of these really great materials that Jan and Rochelle just told you about, but how do our users currently find this digital content? Well, it's a bit disconnected, which is the point of this presentation. So right now we have a lot of paths into this material, and those paths are just a little bit all over the place. So, next slide, please. So probably like most institutions, we have an archives and a special collections website that's main purpose is to connect users to all of our local collections. And our website is good. It's been recently revamped, but it's not that easy to find from our library's homepage. And so of course, in addition to this website, we have lots of other points of entry. Next slide, please. So our library is part of Archives West, which is an aggregator of descriptions of primary sources in the Western United States. It's maintained by the Orbis Cascade Alliance. And as you can see here, we have 575 entries in Archives West as of just a few days ago. Next slide, please. We also use SpringShare's A through Z list, and we have our digital collections linked from this list. So we link both of our local and our commercial collections here. And I was curious, so I looked at how many clicks into our digital collections actually come from this page. I didn't go that far back. I just went to the start of 2020 through November 1st. And we've had 56 clicks into various local digital collections, but we've had 555 clicks alone into the Adam Matthew digital collections. So this means that the digital collections are being found and being used from here, and that's great. Next slide. And then at MSU Library, as I mentioned earlier, we use Primo by Ex Libris as our discovery layer. And so in Primo, we surface our finding aid records, any records for physical materials that have been cataloged. And we also pull in our SpringShare A through Z database list so that we can get those links out to both the local and commercial collections, out to our patrons. And so I know that this option to integrate SpringShare into Primo, it's been around for a while, but it's something that we actually just set up over the summer months. And so we're hoping that we can monitor that and see if we get any increased traffic into our local and commercial databases through that integration. Next slide, please. And then Regarding our commercial digital collections, we do activate those when they're available in the ALMA knowledge base. So for any ALMA users that happen to be in this meeting, you're probably familiar with the ALMA Community Zone and the Central Discovery Index. So these activations will give us that title level and article level metadata if it's available to be activated. So these are our existing pathways for finding and using digital collections. And these pathways, they work. Users are obviously finding our materials, but our concern is that they might not be finding all of the relevant archival material that we have in one location, because we have so many places that our users need to be aware of to look for the material. So I'm actually going to pass it over to Jan, and she's going to talk about one of the ways she's helping to bridge this gap through her instruction efforts.
Thanks for that overview, Hannah. The goal, of course, we always talk about the goal for resource discovery is to make it easy, intuitive, convenient, and hopefully seamless. Unfortunately, moving across types of archival collections is clearly not easy. We have all those access points, but it's difficult to unify them. We know that our users are often challenged by the ways we provide access. They don't always understand our classification systems or the distinctions we make between formats. And they don't really, I don't think they really care, actually. They just find something cool and they don't care where it came from. Is this a local collection donated by an important environmental leader that's been digitized locally? Is it from a commercial vendor? Who cares? I just want to find things that help me succeed. So as we search for the holy grail of seamless online resource discovery for all, our instructional programs in the library have always worked hard to bridge our practices and our content for non-librarians. For our users who are kind of immigrants to our library world and are actually our reason for creating and purchasing these collections in the first place. Instruction in MSU Libraries, Archives and Special Collections, however, has traditionally focused on promoting the use of local primary collections, whether physical or digital. It's as if all those commercial databases belong to another world and we don't have to worry about them. Hannah and Rochelle will worry about those collections. Could I have the next slide, please? So we are trying to change that, of course. As a fairly new member of the Archives and Special Collections Department at MSU, my background, also at MSU, is in teaching those commercial databases to history and literature students during my decades in reference and public service. So I'm especially interested in helping our students cross the borders between the local and the commercial. So to do this, I'm designing learning experiences that connect these resources in the classroom. I don't think that instruction can or should bear all the load for unifying our resources, but I think it plays an important role. For example, this fall, I'm co-teaching a Writing in the Archives class, RIT 491, with the chair of our English department. And it's a really great, fun class to collaborate on. Our goal is to encourage senior writing students to understand the role of archives in public memory and to experience some of the transformative power of working in archives, whether these are local or commercial or just out there on the web. So how am I bridging these? Because of our amazing ebook collections, I was able to assign our students a chapter from a book titled Beyond the Archives, in which a Native American writer and educator, Malaya Powell, talks really movingly about sitting in the physical Newberry Library in Chicago, reading the letters of Charles Eastman, one of the first Native American scholars who was actually Native American. And as I was exploring this article for a possible assignment, I suddenly realized that we actually have the Newberry Library's Edward E. Eyre collection in our Adam Matthew database, American Indian Histories and Culture. And this meant that I could easily give my students the experience of reading the same primary documents that the author read, just in digital format. And then I realized I could introduce them, I could take them a step further and introduce them to some of our local Native American focused collections, such as the John G. Carter papers, and talk about differences between physical and digital experiences, between white accounts of Native American stories and Native American voices themselves. So I'm working that actually went really well to do that. The students loved those connections. And now I'm working with other faculty in history and American studies to design similar experiences. Next slide, please. But, you know, we have to think about, what about the instructors who do not work with us at all? Those who don't know that we offer instruction, no matter how many times we tell them, that we have rich options for both local and commercial primary sources. Those who don't respond to our offers for course integrated instruction. As I've said, a library or archives instruction program cannot do all the work of uniting our collections. We need collaboration within the library to identify other discovery options. So I'm going to turn it back over to Hannah to talk about some things that we're working on. Hannah?
Yep. So continuing on Jan's point, we won't and we don't always have the chance to work with instructors or individual users to teach them about how to use our digital archival materials holistically, right? So we need to have points of discovery in place that let our users have this experience when we might not be there to guide them. And so this is something that, you know, we're in the early stages of working to achieve. And so some of the ideas that we've come up with so far, they might seem really obvious. Some of them might not work and they might be off point, but we still feel that it's really important that we talk about them and try to understand them anyway. And so one of the most obvious things that we could do is to utilize our archives and special collections webpage. You know, and as Jan noted, some of the work that archives has done and special collections has done in the past is to promote the local collections. But this seems like a really good way just to simply link out to those commercial collections so that people just know that they exist. Next slide, please. And then something that we're still in the early stages of looking at is the Primo collections feature. And this is a feature that will let us group items together in an easy to find location in Primo. And our thinking on this, at least right now, is that it might be useful for grouping things together like finding aids. And this is simply because sometimes those facets or those filters from the main Primo search aren't always customizable, or, you know, our users can't limit to finding aid, for example. And so the experience that our students have in Primo doesn't always mirror, you know, what we want it to be, or what we're teaching them when they have a session with Jan and she's talking about finding aids, and then they go into Primo and they're like, what is this? Why can't I find it? And so if that happens and, you know, a user finds the finding aid during a search, they haven't had that instruction session, they might not have any idea what it is or be able to associate it with archives and special collections, or even realize what it means, you know, and the importance of that archival content. And so they might just dismiss it. And so as we look into this tool that we have in Primo, I think we're excited to understand if there's any potential to sort of use it in the way that we're hoping. Next slide, please. And then lastly, something that we've been discussing in the library is the use of non-circulating language in our discovery layer. So of course, the material in special collections is non-circulating, right? But do our users know that? Do they know that they can still come into the library and actually use it? Could that language be more clear? And one of the things here is that we know that we have limits to the changes that we can make in ALMA without there being bigger consequences, you know, because we are part of a shared network with those other Trails libraries that we mentioned earlier. And so we need to be really careful and mindful and really understand the full impact of any changes on this network. And then as I was looking at our SpringShare database list, it occurred to me that maybe I haven't associated the best subject names or database types with our local digital collections. And so is there a standard terminology I could be using? You know, and if I set that up, could that increase traffic into those local collections? And so I think this just opens up the door for my role in acquisitions, you know, with those who work in our special collections unit. And so all of these, you know, technology options are really great and really important, but we still want to really emphasize the importance of outreach and InReach. So I'm going to turn it over to Jan so she can touch on a few points in that area.
Thanks, Hannah. You guys are doing a great job with partners in the library to build bridges between our local and purchased collections. But as you say, another important aspect of crossing borders has to include outreach and InReach efforts. And outreach is something we have traditionally understood as a way to expose archival collections that are local. We do exhibits and we do open houses, inviting people to come and look and explore. We participate in local historical programming, contributing knowledge and items. We hold workshops for the public, and we do all sorts of other events, often focused on physical collections, but sometimes also on digital. Sometimes, though, we forget that InReach is even more critical to increasing understanding and use of our different collections. And by InReach, I mean focused training that targets library employees, including student employees, to ensure that we all understand what local and commercial archives we have and how to access them. This is especially important for public service employees who often know more about our commercial archives than our local because of the sort of forbidden planet aura that is traditionally cultivated by archives and special collections. And there are often places of locked doors, shorter hours, scary reading room rules, and ways of describing their holdings and services as different from anything else in the library. Student employees, for instance, may be afraid to send people into archives, either physically or virtually, for fear of making a mistake, or they just simply don't know about something that we have. So if a student researcher comes in and asks for help at our main service desk, which you can see a picture of above in our slideshow, and they're in the Global History of Food course, and they may be shown our wonderful food and drink and history collection from Adam Matthew, but that student employee that's helping them, or maybe even the reference librarian that's helping them, may not know that we have a digitized copy of a cookbook by Belle McDonald, an African-American woman who lived in Bozeman in the early 20th century, which would be great to use in a class like the Global History of Food. So we are really trying to increase our training internally beyond archives and special collections. I think that I want to turn it back over to Hannah to just wind things down now. Hannah?
Yeah, so I'll just summarize with, as you can see, we're just getting started here down this path of working to better integrate our local and digital archival collections, through technology and through our outreach and InReach efforts. And we hope to learn a whole lot more as we kind of continue this project and sort of improve things around here. But for now, I think, we're almost at time, but we are curious if anybody out there has questions. And we'd also like to hear, what's working in your library if you've had this type of conversation, or any issues or, successes that you've had. And if you don't have anything, but you think of a question later, you can feel free to reach out to Rochelle, Jan, or myself, and we'd be happy to chat further about this. Let's see. And I see a chat that says, I'd like to share this session with the Special Collections and Archives colleague. Will a recording or the slides be available? I believe, yes, they'll be available if you attended the conference. I think you can get access. But if you could also send us a note, we'd be happy to share our slides with you separately if your colleague doesn't have access to the recording. Cool. And then somebody says, do you have stats to support the usage of primary source databases that are paid databases? Yes, we have a lot of the ones that we have are compliant with counter usage statistics. So we do look at those for all the reasons that Rochelle mentioned to just kind of inform, future subject collection purchases and whatnot. And then we've also started looking at just kind of broader stats. So the stats that we're getting through SpringShare. We don't have anything on the local collections yet, but that's something we soon hope to get. Let's see. And then Jen, I think this question would be for you. Have you incorporated the commercial databases into archival instruction, and how?
Yes, we do that. We happen to have, one of the things I took out of our presentation was a mention of one of our history capstone courses this semester was taught by a faculty member here who happens to be the world's expert on World's Fairs. And so we have both of the World's Fairs databases that are out there. One is from Gail and one is from Adam Matthew. And we actually had his students come in and work with those databases with him present, and also took them into our reading room and showed them some of our materials and talked about archives generally. Although we don't have locally any World's Fairs materials in our collections, it was just an interesting triangulation of the expert who acted as a consultant on both of these databases for Gail and Adam Matthew, who was teaching the class. And so we can do that combination. And when I work with the Global History of Food class, I do also work closely with that faculty member who has actually helped us gather some materials for our archives and helped us decide what should be digitized, so that her classes have access to both the commercial and to the local. So there are some great successes that we have, but those are fairly laborious, and we can't just rely on those to make that leap.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. And then we just have one comment that says, I observed what's interesting is the concept that digital collections and e-resources are considered two different things when users do not care about that distinction. Yeah, I guess I would agree with that. We have a lot of things we distinguish, and our users really don't tend to care. So
I think we make those distinctions internally in order for us to figure out how to meld them. We have to make some distinctions that ultimately need to go away when the user sees them. So that's a really good point.
well, I'm not seeing anything else come in. So, oh, one other quick question, Jan, I think this is for you again. In the current MES, are you directing the history capstone students to the commercial databases more than the local physical sources?
In that current class, yes, because their whole class is focused on World's Fairs. They have the luxury of being taught by this expert, and we have those resources. So yes, those are. You know, often in capstone classes, the students might have an umbrella topic for the class, but they are then free to choose their own focus. The capstone is their final paper, research paper in history. So it often boils down to the student themselves working with us to make a decision about where they focus.
Cool. Yeah, no problem, Jennifer. Great. Well, I'm just eyeballing the two different chats here. That's why I'm staring away from the camera. Yeah, I guess thank you all for your great questions and attending our session this afternoon. We really appreciate it. And again, if you have any other questions, comments, or just want to chat further about this topic, feel free to send Jan, Rochelle, or myself an email. And yeah, thank you all again.